The house was too quiet. Josh had been gone for only 2 days, but it already felt like the silence was growing legs, creeping through the hallways, pressing against the windows, curling up next to me at night. I'd told him I didn't mind the trip, said I'd use the time to rest, maybe read, maybe write. But the truth was, I hadn't picked up a book or opened my journal. I just wandered from room to room like something waiting to happen. Then Malik called. His voice crackled through the speaker with the casual confidence he always carried. "Just checking in on the pretty blonde left home alone," he said with a laugh. He always flirted like that. Light, joking, never serious. At least not when Josh was around. But Josh wasn't around. "I'm fine," I said, even though I wasn't quite sure if that was true. "Just a little bored." Malik paused. "Bored's dangerous," he said. "You need a distraction." I knew where this was going. I didn't stop him. Later that evening I was in his truck, watching the city dissolve behind us, replaced by long empty roads and orange-hued sand dunes that stretched out like a forgotten painting. The wind carried heat even as the sun sank lower. I had thrown a shawl over my shoulders, not because I was cold, but because I suddenly felt exposed. "You okay back there?" he asked, glancing at me as he drove. "Yeah," I replied, maybe a little too quickly. He smiled, then said nothing for a while. Malik was always comfortable in silence. That was one thing I'd always noticed about him. He never rushed a moment, never filled it with unnecessary talk. Unlike Josh, who treated silence like something to be fixed. We arrived just past sunset. The hut looked like something out of a travel blog. Clay walls, a wooden door barely hanging on, a flickering lantern tied to a rusted nail. But it was beautiful in a strange, forgotten way. Like it had been waiting for someone to remember it. "Welcome to the middle of nowhere," Malik said as he opened the door for me. Inside, the air was warm and still. There was one bed, a small table, and a battered couch that had seen too many summers. He lit a few candles and handed me a glass of wine. We didn't toast. We didn't need to. I sat, legs tucked under me, while he lounged on the opposite end. For a while we talked about nothing. Movies, weather, a story from his childhood in Lagos. But slowly the space between us shifted. His eyes lingered longer. His voice softened. And I felt something unspoken start to build, like pressure before a storm. "You know," he said finally, "I always wondered what you were like when you weren't someone's wife." My breath caught. I didn't respond right away. I stared at the candle's flicker, its flame thin and unpredictable. "And what do you think I'm like now?" I asked quietly. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, gaze fixed. "I think you're more than you let yourself be." No one had ever said that to me before. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was electric. Then his fingers brushed mine. Lightly, without insistence. Just enough to ask. Just enough to tempt. I didn't pull away. My mind screamed all the right things. "Married. This is wrong." But my body betrayed me. Or maybe it saved me. I didn't know anymore. Malik didn't press. He stood, walked to the doorway, and looked out into the night sky, giving me space. The moon hung low, swollen and golden, casting a glow over the sand. "You ever just let go, Lena?" he asked without turning. I didn't answer. Couldn't. But I stood. I walked toward him. And when I reached the threshold of that little hut in the middle of the desert, I felt something shift inside me. Maybe it was the wine. Maybe the wind. Or maybe it was the fact that, for the first time in a long time, someone saw me and didn't look away. I stood beside him in silence. We didn't touch. Not yet. But the night was young. And we were very, very far from home. The night thickened around the hut, folding over us like a warm, invisible blanket. The desert, so vast and open by day, now felt intimate, closed in by shadows, moonlight, and the low flicker of candles that softened everything, even my guilt. Malik returned to the small room holding a second glass of wine. His bare feet made no sound on the worn wooden floor. He handed me the drink and sat down beside me, not too close but not far either. "I like the quiet out here," he said. "No pressure to be anything." I nodded, letting the silence settle between us again. It wasn't just the quiet of the desert. It was the quiet inside me, the stillness I hadn't felt in years. The constant mental checklist of a wife, meals, routines, expectations, had vanished the moment I stepped through this door. "You don't talk about Josh much," Malik added, tilting his head, watching me. "What's there to say?" I replied. "He works. He travels. Calls. That's about it." "That's not a marriage," Malik said gently. "That's an arrangement." I looked away. He wasn't wrong, but hearing it out loud felt like a slap to the version of myself still pretending. "I don't know when we stopped being close," I admitted. "I think we just drifted into a routine and mistook it for love." Malik reached forward, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from my face. It was a small gesture, but it lit a fire I'd buried beneath politeness and years of compromise. "I'm not trying to take anything from you," he said. "I just see what's already missing." That broke me. Not in a dramatic way. Not with tears or declarations. It was a quiet kind of surrender, a loosening of the restraints I had so carefully fastened around myself. I leaned in, not because I was swept away in the moment, but because I chose to. Because something in me whispered that I didn't want to walk away from this night untouched. Not emotionally. Not physically. Our lips met. Softly, curiously, like we were both testing if this was real. And it was. Malik's kiss didn't feel like a betrayal. Felt like permission. Permission to feel. To want. To exist outside the mold I'd been forced into. His hands were warm against my skin, trailing slowly from my shoulders to the small of my back. Every touch was intentional, not rushed. He was unwrapping me, not just physically but emotionally, layer by layer. "You're trembling," he whispered. "I'm not scared," I replied. "Just alive." Clothes fell away like autumn leaves. Soft, slow, quiet. We moved without words, guided only by breath and instinct. But just as I lay back on the bed, Malik paused. He looked at me, really looked, and asked, "Are you sure?" That question was everything. 'Cause he gave me a choice. He nodded. Yes. What followed wasn't rushed or careless. It was patient, tender, like he was memorizing every inch of me. He didn't just touch my body. He touched something deeper, something I hadn't known was still there. Desire. Not the performative kind, not the marital duty, but real, pulsing want. I had forgotten how that felt. After we lay side by side in the dim light. No words. Just the sound of wind whispering outside the hut and the soft hum of our shared breath. I stared at the ceiling, counting the cracks in the wood above me. I wasn't sure what I'd feel, shame maybe, guilt, regret. But what I felt was freedom. That scared me more than anything. Malik's fingers traced idle patterns on my arm. "You don't have to explain anything," he murmured. "Not to me. Not even to yourself." I turned to look at him. His expression was unreadable but calm, steady. He wasn't asking for more. He wasn't asking for promises. He was just there. And that made everything even more dangerous. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. I didn't know how I'd face Josh when he returned. But I knew one thing. That night in the desert had cracked something open in me. And no matter how hard I tried, I wouldn't be able to close it again. Dawn arrived in hushed tones, its golden light leaking through the slats in the wooden hut, slowly peeling away the shadows that had wrapped around us like secrets. I opened my eyes to find the bed empty beside me. For a brief, irrational moment, I thought maybe I had dreamt it all, that the heat, the tension, the kisses, the fire Malik had lit in me, were figments of a restless mind. But the warmth still clung to the sheets, and the faint scent of his skin lingered on my body like perfume I never asked to wear. I wrapped the thin blanket around myself and stepped quietly into the small kitchen space. Malik was standing by the stove, shirtless, muscles relaxed, pouring water into a dented metal pot. His eyes met mine, and he offered a quiet, knowing smile. "Didn't want to wake you," he said. "You looked at peace." I didn't answer right away. I was still trying to understand what this new version of me was supposed to feel. If I was supposed to regret what happened. If I should. He handed me a chipped mug of hot tea and leaned against the counter, watching me in that calm, unreadable way of his. "No speeches?" I asked, breaking the silence. "No expectations," he replied. His answer settled into my chest like a soft weight. Not heavy, just present. We sat outside on the porch steps, mugs in hand, watching the desert wake. The wind carried the smell of sand and silence, both strange and oddly comforting. "I don't know what happens next," I confessed, voice barely louder than the breeze. "You don't have to," he said. "You only have to decide who you want to be when it does." His words weren't meant to guide me. They weren't promises or solutions. They were truths, unpolished and simple. And somehow that made them harder to ignore. The drive back was quieter than the one before. The radio was off. The air between us had shifted. Not awkward, not full of tension, but rather wrapped in understanding. Neither of us needed to name what had happened. It was already written on our skin. By the time the first signs of civilization crept back into view, I had folded myself back into the neat version of Lena Harper, the wife. The woman who smiled politely, who kept her secrets tucked behind her ribs. Malik pulled up outside my house, engine idling. "Will you be okay?" he asked, eyes holding mine. I gave him a smile, small but real. "Eventually." He nodded, then reached across the seat and brushed his fingers against my wrist. "Just a touch. Farewell, not a beginning. Take care of you," he said. And then he was gone. I stepped into my house and was immediately swallowed by the familiar silence. But now it felt different. Heavier. I walked past the framed wedding photo in the hallway without glancing at it. In the bathroom, I stared at myself in the mirror. My reflection looked the same. Same hair, same eyes, same lips. But something was different. There was a softness to my face, and also a steel I hadn't seen in years. I wasn't broken. I wasn't lost. I was awake. That night in the desert hadn't been a mistake. It hadn't been revenge or rebellion. It had been a reckoning. A quiet, intimate realization that I was still capable of feeling deeply, choosing freely, and existing outside of someone else's story. I didn't know what would happen when Josh returned. I didn't know if I'd tell him, or if I could. But I knew I couldn't go back to pretending. The woman who walked into that hut was unsure, numb, hidden beneath layers of habit. The woman who walked out, who stood now in her bedroom with the sun rising behind her, wasn't afraid anymore. I sat on the edge of the bed, pulled the blanket over my shoulders, and exhaled. The world hadn't changed, but I had. And once you've felt that kind of truth under your skin, you can't ever unfeel it.